welcome. My name is Deborah Ethwin Arbenlow, and I'm a blogger and photographer for Second Life. Today I'm going to be showing you how to contour your Second Life photos using the dodge and burn method from my previous tutorial. So I have a couple pictures on here of actual makeup contouring, which I have aptly named Makeup is a Lie. So I have two shots here of real life people with contouring makeup. So you can see that contouring makeup is a good baseline for where you want to add your shadows and highlights to. So if you're ever in doubt of where you should be adding shadows and highlights to, you can take a look at some contouring makeup photos to see where the areas belong before you blend them. So you can see here highlights under the eyes, forehead, chin, under the cheekbone. Cheekbone has shadow. Bridge of the nose has, the sides of the bridge have shadow, and the top of the bridge has highlights. Above the lip has some highlight. So there's a lot of really cool pictures of contouring makeup, which is basically Photoshop in real life, that will show you the basic areas that you need to put your highlights. So that's one part of contouring your Second Life photo. The other part is natural shadow. So in this photo, that's a real life photo, you can see that this young girl has a natural shadow that's falling on her face because the light is hitting one side, and she has hair over here that's also increasing how dark it is. So you have to consider both of those two things, the natural contouring and also the way that the shadow will fall on the face. So we're going to take a look at a Second Life photo that I did. So here's the raw photo, and then here is the edited photo with all the shadows and highlights. So it's a pretty big difference. So this photo is just raw, no shadows, and this one, all the shadows, all the highlights, all of that. So this is a pretty complex version. I'm not going to spend this amount of time showing you because it takes hours to create this kind of effect. But I will show you the quicker version of it. But fair warning, this may not be as entertaining as some of my other tutorials because, to be honest, contouring is pretty boring. So I will talk as I go along, but I will not be offended if you tune out of this particular webinar. So we're gonna do our dodge and burn in here. If you have not yet watched my previous tutorial on how to create your dodge and burn layers, then you should do that before. You should pause this and go over and watch that because I'm not going to explain it here for the sake of time. So I have a dodge and burn layer. Here's my dodge layer, is the light layer. Here's my burn layer, which is the dark layer. Okay, so in order to create the contouring effects, we're going to paint white on the masks here that we have put on our dodge and burn layers, which I taught in my previous tutorial. So we're going to use white paint to create the shadows using these layers. So I'm going to switch to the white. I have my brush selected. I have chosen 0% hardness on my brush. My opacity is at 100%, but I'm going to change my flow to about 3%. You want to be between 1 and 5% as you do this most of the time so that you can gradually build. Otherwise, much like real life contouring makeup, you may end up looking like a clown if you don't take care of it. So we're going to zoom in and focus mostly on the face. So let's zoom into 100%. And you should edit whatever else you want to edit before you move on to this. So on your first layer, on your initial layer, you want to edit any imperfections, because normally I'd edit like the nose and all of that. You want to do that before you make your dodge and burn layers so that you don't have to do double work. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So I have my pretty face, but it needs some depth. So I'm going to go to my burn layer, which is my shadow layer, and I have my white selected, so I'm going to paint on my layer mask. I have my layer mask selected, and I'm going to paint smaller and larger to create a graduated effect. And what I mean by that is I'm going to reduce and increase the size of my brush so that it doesn't create hard lines. And you can clean them up later, so you don't necessarily have to do this. You could just put a big brush and then clean up all the lines afterwards. But I personally prefer a graduated effect. I'm using the left and right bracket on my keyboard to increase and decrease the size of my brush quickly. So I'm going to start with a smaller brush, and I'm going to paint these shadows at the edge of my hairline. And you can see them popping out. So first I'm going to paint shadows at the edge, then I'm going to increase my brush, and I'm going to spread that shadow out a little bit. So we have looked to see on our contouring photos the areas where shadows should go, and we're going to follow that same basic principle. Under the neck we want to add some. And this doesn't have to be super neat. You can do this kind of a little helter-skelter and then clean it up later. But you don't want to go too crazy with the helter-skelter, because then you're going to end up having to clean up more than you bargained for. Okay, so I've added some shadow there. Now I can see that I have hair in the way of my face. So I definitely want to add a shadow there because there will be one that naturally occurs. So I'm going to check to see where I think my shadow might fall. In this case, I can see here that my shadow goes in this direction. The hair, you see where the hair comes down here, this is where the hair ends. And that means that's where my shadow should connect. So I'm going to fill in this whole area with some of the darker color. And then I'm going to clean it up afterwards. So I'm going to pull shadows out of this area, and you could also paint the shadows on. You don't have to use the dodge and burn. So if you wanted to, you could add a layer and just paint some dark on. But I'm going to use the dodge and burn layers. So I've created a darker shadow sort of effect in this area, and it doesn't seem like there's a whole bunch there, but there actually is more than you might expect. So let's turn off this burn layer and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so original, dodge and burn. It's a little bit messy, you know, I have a little bit too much in some areas, but you can clean that up as you go. So turn that off, turn it back on. So now I want to clean up this a little bit. So we're going to switch to black. We'll keep the flow the same, and then we'll just go along the edge of where we know our shadow is. If you can't see the edge, turn it off, then turn it on, and you'll see where you need to go. So I'm cleaning up a little bit of the edges, cleaning up the edges on the sides, because you want no hard lines. People who do contouring makeup do not keep the lines of the contour, and neither do you. So we're softening that up. Okay, so we have a pretty good shade going on here. We need to add a little bit more to our nose. So we're going to add to the bridge of the nose some shadow. Add some to the bridge. Add some here, some shadowing. And then we want to add some highlights as well. So we're going to go to our dodge layer, which is our light layer. And I'm going to do again some graduated painting. So I'm going to take a smaller paint section. This is easier if you have a stylus, which I do not have a stylus. I use just a regular one. So you've got that, and then we're going to increase it, spread that out a little bit so it's not just a hard line. Now look, see? Highlight. The same thing we're going to do on the edge here, tip of the nose, where it catches light. Smaller, smaller, small, bigger, bigger. So let's take a look at that. You see here, I've got highlight here that are creating these cool effects. And then I can clean it up a little so it's not so crazy. Clean it up a little. So let's zoom out a little bit and see. Okay, so let's take a look at both of the layers off, both of the layers on. And I've really hardly done any work on here. So you can see that there's a large amount of effect. Let's go back to 100%. Okay, so we're going to add some more here. I'm going to add some to the under eye area and the corner of the eye. Switch back, make sure you're in white. So I'm going to reduce this, and I'm going to paint more firmly in some parts to create a more vibrant white effect, and then increase it to spread that effect out. Spreading it, and then we want to paint under the eye to create that highlight. It's really important to know that it doesn't have to be perfect. You can erase anywhere that you have the extra shadows simply by, or extra shadows or highlights, simply by switching to the black tool and erasing what you've done. So perfection is not something that you have to worry about here, which is why it's okay if you look like a clown for a little bit, because you can fix your clown face. So adding highlights in a lot of areas. Highlight here, chin, highlight up here, a little bit of the forehead near the hair, but not too much because we also have a shadow there. Highlight in it. Normally I'd have a brow here, but this is a no brow skin. Under the brow you'd usually have a highlight. Here, I'm going to reduce the size of my brush and increase the highlight on my Cupid's bow, that's this here, and up here on my lip. Then I'll increase it a little bit. And also here, where I have a highlight, there's already a highlight on my skin, but we're going to bring that out even more and make it really pop. Okay, so this is pretty extreme. So we're going to want to clean it by switching to the black. We have dodge selected, which is my light layer. I'm going to increase this brush, and I'm just going to clean up these hard edges where I have too much light. So you reduce the sort of clown look that you end up with when you do too much, too excited with your contouring. Okay, so let's take a look now. Take it off, put it back on. Take it off. Ooh, pretty. Okay, and then we'll look at it one at a time too. So let's take off highlighting. You see where the highlights are. And we'll take off burning. You see where the shadows are. And then down here, in this chest area, you'll do the same. This takes a little less practice, but it's more space. So we'll increase this pretty big. I should probably switch to white. This happens to me all the time. I forget that I've moved to black, and then I'm painting and painting and painting and wondering why there's no effect going on. So make sure you're in the white selected paint foreground. Alright, so I'm on my burn layer, my shadow layer, and I'm going to add shadows around the edges of my body. You may even want to increase your flow a little bit here if you want to go really fast, but I don't, just because I want to make sure I have the most natural effect possible. So I'm adding shadows to the edges, edges, adding shadows. Basically, shadows should be on the edges of pretty much anywhere unless you have light that's shining on it. You should expect that you will have shadows on the edges of your skin. So we're adding shadows to the edges pretty haphazardly. You don't really need to be really neat with this, especially because this is a green screen photo, so I don't have to worry about a background that I'm painting on. When you have a background, this will maybe require a little bit more care, but not for me. Okay, so let's take a look. Zoom out a little bit more. Oh, not in, out. Okay, so let's take a look at what the burn layer looks like now. Okay, so you see all this shadow I've created. And in some cases you won't even need highlights very much in the areas because the shadow... Make sure you have selected your layer mask, which I did not. So, as I was saying, sometimes you may not even need to add very much highlight because you may add so much depth with just your burn that you don't need to dodge. Adding some more shadow. We're going to reduce the size of this, add some shadow here in the breasticle area, my chesticles. Add some more depth to my cleavage. Basically, you're going to want to follow along the already present lines, or where lines should be in your skin, lines of shadow, to create this sort of effect. I can increase it to create a graduated shadow. So you can see that I've added these shadows and then I create highlight effects without even using the dodge. So now I've selected my dodge. I'm going to increase those highlights a little bit on my boobies and my clothing. Up here a little bit where there would be shine. And then on the arms, usually in the center area, we'll increase some light there. Center area. Center. Increasing and decreasing the size of our brush. Okay, so now I've added basically like a shine, and this is slightly extreme. I'm going to fit on the screen so you can see. This is slightly extreme, but here you can see I did a little bit of an extreme sort of shadow and highlight here on here. So the concept is very similar. So normal with both of my layers. Normal with both of my layers. So I would need to clean this up a little bit more still, or maybe even reduce the opacity, which you can also do. So here on my dodge layer, let's decrease my highlight so you can see it darkening. And then let's decrease my burn layer a little bit. Okay, so now same effect but less. So if you ever add too much, you can always just reduce your opacity, just like anything else. So that's the basics of contouring. So you can see that I've added my highlights where they belong, I've added shadows where they should go, and you create a pretty cool looking effect. So if you have stuck it out with me for this tutorial, which is a little bit more rambling than the rest of my tutorials, thank you. And if you have any questions, you can leave them below. You could send them to me on Second Life at Diberethwin Arbonlow. You could send them to me on Plurk or on Flickr, the links of which are in my channel. And thank you for joining me. I'll catch you next time.